San Francisco is one of the most expensive cities in America, and when we finally reached it, we were already over budget on our trip. So we tried to survive the city while spending as little money as possible without missing out on any of our top picks. In this video, we are going to show you all the places we went, where we parked, what we ate, and what we paid. I will also give a completely biased, arbitrary rating to all of the sites we visit. You would have to be pretty disconnected from the world to not already know about San Francisco and the amazing things the city has to offer, but also all the problems the city has faced, from the housing crisis and homelessness to the property crime and the smash and grabs. When we visited in April of 2023, the San Francisco area saw over 1,900 vehicle crimes, so we were a bit overly cautious. We started our morning from our hotel down in San Mateo and set out on the 40-minute drive up to the Golden Gate Bridge on the north end of San Francisco. Along the way, we made our first stop at the most famous Victorian-style houses in the city. If you were a 90s kid like us, you should recognize them from the final scene of the intro to Full House. They are known as the Painted Ladies and are located just across the street from Alamo Square in the heart of the city. Since the houses are in the middle of a residential area, we thought this would be the hardest spot to find parking, but it was actually a breeze. We found some street parking right at the park, which we probably were supposed to pay for, but we weren't going to be there long, so... These famous homes have appeared in an estimated 70 movies and TV shows, and the Pink House made the news when it sold for $3.5 million back in 2020. I'm giving the Painted Ladies a 7.5 out of 10. I'm just a bit too young to have the nostalgic factor for the park, but they're very beautiful houses. From the Painted Ladies, it was about a 15-minute drive to the Golden Gate Bridge, where we saved a bit of money by parking in the cheaper lot above the main lot, and then walked the short distance to the bridge. There is a well-maintained path to follow where we took this exceptional selfie and had our first views of the San Francisco Bay and the Golden Gate Bridge. We walked under the bridge on the path and then took the stairs up to the overlook, where there is some signage about the history and architecture, as well as this very cool miniature model of the bridge. Okay, you touched it.
Oh wow, it.
Walking across the Golden Gate Bridge is free and takes about 45 minutes if you walk the whole thing, but of course you can turn around at any point. The further out you get, the more the wind is blowing, and the temperature was around 65 the day we went, but it really felt like 40 degrees walking across this bridge. We spent much of our vacation in warm climates and really weren't prepared for this, but we put on our only jackets that we brought and walked all the way to the second suspension tower. The walkway extrudes out around each of the towers and gives a better view of the city and the bay, so we suggest at least walking out to the first tower. The Golden Gate Bridge gets a 9 out of 10. I took 1 point off because most of the walk was directly next to a tall chain-link fence that was distracting from the views. We headed back to the visitor center where we picked up our Golden Gate magnet and took a quick restroom break before hopping back in our car and heading to our next stop. We drove a few miles out towards the Pacific Ocean, cutting through a very nice neighborhood with multi-million-dollar homes. We were headed to Sutro Baths but made a slightly wrong turn into a parking lot and ended up at the Eastern Coastal Trail Overlook, which had a really unique view of the Golden Gate Bridge. We sat on a bench and admired the view a minute before heading to the next parking lot for Sutro Baths. Parking in this part of the park is mostly free. We found a spot in the land's parking. We were starting to get pretty hungry, so we did cut the stop short with the plans on coming back if we had to, but we did manage to get a few pictures and videos. This whole side of the park is definitely worth spending a few hours and offers lots of walking trails through the woods and beautiful overlooks. It also has some beaches and a gift shop to explore. We didn't spend enough time at Land's End to give a proper rating, but I'm going to say a soft 10. If we had more time in San Francisco, we would have spent the day over here, but we only had 24 hours, so it was on to Ghirardelli Square. The main structures on the block operated as a chocolate factory for Ghirardelli from 1895 until the 1960s. The square has now been transformed into a tourist trap filled with restaurants and a brewery, as well as a few overpriced shops. We didn't see almost anything about the history of America's oldest chocolate company, or even something showing us how the chocolate is made. Ghirardelli Square gets a 5 out of 10. Very mid. So we just quickly walked around through the square and crossed through the Maritime Garden, passing right by the historic cable car turntable before walking down Jefferson Street to get through. I did forget to mention, we found street parking directly in front of Ghirardelli Square, and it was only $1.50 per hour, so I think we were pretty lucky there. But Jefferson Street is filled with typical touristy shops and restaurants, and has a nice, fun atmosphere to just enjoy some window shopping. But it's also home to one of San Francisco's most famous foods. Halfway down the street at Boudin Bakery, you can get clam chowder and a sourdough bread bowl. San Francisco claims that sourdough from the city is unlike any other because the frequent heavy fog is an ideal environment for the growth of yeast, and San Francisco sourdough uses a special kind of yeast unique to the area. They use a sourdough starter dating back to the gold rush of 1849 when Boudin first opened. Boudin Bakery is also famous for creating unique shapes and animals out of their bread, including the iconic sourdough Sam. I give Boudin Bakery a 10 out of 10. Paul paid for it, so free for me. After we finished the best lunch of our entire road trip, we headed down Jefferson Street to Pier 39. This pier is also your typical tourist pier with some pretty cheap gift shops and some restaurants, but Pier 39 has a free and amazing attraction. Sea lions. Lots of sea lions. We don't have any sea lions in Virginia, so this was the first time seeing them in the wild, and we spent a good portion of our time here. I won't bore you with too much footage of them, but here are a few of the better clips of them screaming and splashing around.
Yep.
At the end of the pier, we also got a good view of Alcatraz out in the bay. However, Alcatraz tours start around $45 per person, so that was not on the agenda for us. The sea lions, combined with our amazing lunch, made the side of San Francisco totally worth it. Pier 39 gets a 10 out of 10 because although it's mostly more shops, the sea lions were very cool and some of the shops had decent prices. We were able to pick up 4 magnets for $12. After leaving Pier 39, we headed back to Ghirardelli Square, where we did give in to the temptation and split a brownie sundae before we hopped in the car and drove around downtown for a little bit. We didn't have quite enough time to find some parking and get out and walk, but we drove by the Transamerica Pyramid and went through Chinatown to get some pictures. And we also passed by the Pier 7 Mani Paths that Paul says is a very famous skate spot in San Francisco. We could have spent more time exploring around downtown, but we opted to pay the $9 toll to drive across the Golden Gate Bridge to go see some of the largest trees in the world. Just after the bridge, we did make a quick stop at the Vista Point, which is where you would end up if you walk across the whole thing. I think this was the better viewpoint for photos because you can get the city in the background. But 7 out of 10, you'll either have to pay the toll or walk 2 miles to get here. It was also crowded at this viewpoint and smelled like pee. From the bridge, Muir Woods is about a 30-minute drive north into the Redwood Canyon, down some very winding roads with very limited cell service. Make sure you pay attention to where you're going because you might not be able to use GPS to get you back out. Although, Paul actually got us to Muir Beach and then back to civilization without GPS, so it might not be too hard. Looking at the map, the portion of the road where we didn't have service just seems to be a big loop. Muir Woods National Monument is typically $15 per adult, but we have our America the Beautiful Pass that gets us into every national park for free. The America the Beautiful Pass is $80 annually and gets either your car into the park, or if the park is a per-person fee like this one, it gets 4 adults in for free. So definitely worth picking up if you plan on visiting more than one national park in a year.
There's a big boy.
The path through the forest was designed quite well and offers a short half-mile loop, a mile loop, and finally a 2-mile out and back trail. After having such a busy day, we opted to take the 1-mile loop. We started out by the visitor center, which was considerably busy, but once we crossed over the first bridge, we barely saw anyone and it was quite peaceful. The path took us right along the Redwood Creek, which is a vital part of the salmon ecosystem in the area. The world's tallest known tree is named Hyperion and is located way up north in a remote part of Redwood National Park and stands 380 feet tall. None of the redwoods in Muir Woods are this tall, but the national park does say that some of them stand over 250 feet tall and have a base of up to 22 feet around. With as tall as these trees are, the roots only go into the ground around 10 to 13 feet, so some of them unfortunately get pushed over by strong winds and earthquakes. However, they do intertwine their roots with each other, so when they are in a cluster, they have a much better chance of surviving a storm or earthquake. You are looking at redwood burls, which are abnormal growths usually found near the base of the trees. They typically grow from injury, stress, or infection and are highly sought after in woodworking. I was curious, so I Googled it. Here's a coffee table for over $5,000. The unique grain patterns make the burls very valuable. This redwood is known as the selfie tree, and you can stand inside and see the fire scars from an old fire.
It's all burnt in here.
Back in 1892, the all-men, ultra-weird, rich people group, known as the Bohemian Club, needed a private place to hold their annual summer creep fest, so they built a giant 70-foot statue of Buddha and a theater within the redwood forest. But after their 2-week camping trip, the Bohemian Club decided that the forest didn't suit their needs, so they purchased a redwood forest further north in Monte Rio. Over time, storms in the forest have erased all remains of the Bohemian Club's artifacts. Another fascinating story involving Muir Woods dates back to 1945, during the 2-month conference that created the United Nations. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt and other world leaders had a conference planned in San Francisco to iron out all the details when, unfortunately, FDR passed away in office, just 13 days before the start of the conference. The newly sworn-in President Truman, as well as leaders from 45 other nations, continued with the conference, and on May 19, 1945, over 500 delegates took time off from the conference to visit Muir Woods in remembrance of our 32nd president. Muir Woods National Monument gets a 12 out of 10 because these trees are so massive they go off the charts. As our day in San Francisco came to a close, we made our final stop down at Muir Beach. Muir Beach offers restrooms, outdoor showers, and some great hiking trails that take you up to the cliffside for a great vantage point. But we had our flip-flops on because we had one final thing to check off our bucket list: dipping our toes in the Pacific Ocean. It was so cold.
Oh, it's so cold. Oh.
Our trip was finally over. We drove all the way from Arizona through the Grand Canyon and on to Vegas, and then cut through the Mojave Desert to reach the Pacific Coast Highway and spent our last day in San Francisco. Leave a comment down below of your favorite spots in San Francisco, and like and subscribe if you want to see our next adventure, where we dip our toes into our third ocean and try to survive one of the most dangerous cities in the world. But don't worry, we're staying in the touristy part. Thanks for watching!